welcome to Old Man GM's video game reviews. Today we're going to be seeing my top 10 Atari 2600 games. Now when I'm ranking these games, I am ranking them based on the experiences I had with these games when I was a young man. So there might be a game that I would have ranked if I was saying these are the best games. But to me, these are those games that we had those experiences with, that they really meant something to us. When Superman came out, I'm a big comic book fan. When I was a little kid, up till about 12, Superman was my jam. And I used to get a lot of grief at Coe Elementary in North Olmsted, Ohio, because I liked Superman and everybody else was like Marvel and Spider-Man was it. But once I actually read a couple Spider-Man comics, they just felt a lot deeper to me. But I still had this love for DC and Superman. And when you look at it, you would think this game would actually maybe rate higher on my list than Adventure. It's very similar. They're both single player games. They're both, you're kind of going on a quest. And this one, you're Superman. You know, you change into Clark Kent. You walk to the bridge. Lex Luthor blows up the bridge. You walk back, change into Superman. You got to go find the pieces of the bridge while you're battling bad guys and stuff like that. And it's a timer-based game. I was pretty quick at it. I had gotten back then. Now it'd probably take me, who knows how long. It'd probably take me a good hour to get it down. But I know I went from like 15, 16-minute games to below 5 minutes, like 4 minutes and 12. It might have even been sicker than that. It was crazy. But again, this game, I didn't think it looked as nice as Adventure did. And even though it had a lot more kind of to explore, it felt more just left and right kind, linear. You were like going here, here. Where in Adventure, you were going up here and down here and off to the side, and there's secret rooms. There might be, I don't know for sure, but I never found an Easter egg in Superman. But it was a good game. It was one of those games I really enjoyed. I paid a lot of money for it, I remember back then. I bought it pretty much when it first came out in 1979. And I played it a good amount, but this isn't a game I would show off my friends. Adventure, I'd be like, you gotta come see this. This game, I didn't do that with. Now, Laser Blast was an Activision game. Again, my buddy who I played Atari 2600 with the most was Jimmy Heron. A lot of us played it though. We were teens, late teens, 16, 17. We had so much fun with so many of these games at parties and stuff like that. Like we would have, dragster competitions, and the winner, the loser had to drink a shot. We would have boxing competitions, where we would just take turns and we would have like whole little tournaments. Well, Laser Blast was, and it tended to be the Activision games, except for combat. We played a lot of combat. That was a lot of fun when you could get that buddy of yours right at that angle and just keep blasting them, and he or she couldn't do anything. But Laser Blast was another one of those that for some reason, I could get into the flow with. It took me a bit. I got into the flow much easier with Space Invaders. I think that's why I enjoy these retro games. These retro games really are so simple, and they're about as much muscle memory almost as in building your intuition as they are about playing a game like most of the modern games. You can just zen into it. You can completely zone. And I just remember to me, I would go down with my UFO. I would go over to the middle, shoot straight down, killing the middle guy, move to the right, then go to the left. And I liked Laser Blast. To me, when I wanted to get like a Missile Command feel, I played Laser Blast. I did not play Missile Command. I never really, to me, Missile Command might be on my, I'd hate to say 10 worst games because they made a lot of bad games in the Atari 2600 towards the end. But to me, out of all the major releases, Missile Command was my least favorite. I played Laser Blast if I wanted that feeling of Missile Command. Combat probably wouldn't make my list of best games. Again, this list is geared more towards the experiences I've had surrounding different games in the Atari 2600. But the original cartridge that it came with, this and Air Sea Battle and a couple other games were the only ones on it. And Combat and Air Sea Battle we played the most. At the beginning, probably because games were so dang expensive. But we had a lot of fun with Combat. I mean, if you could hit your buddy in just the right way, in the right area, you could destroy him. Once you got that upper hand. And that taught an important lesson. Air Sea Battle was, okay, you missed it this, well, you'll hit it the next time. But in Combat, it was mono against mono. You were like it, when you got that upper hand, you didn't let it go. And if you took that upper hand and you got it back somehow, you just went nuts. It was awesome. You loved it. We would go crazy. Now, we were probably 15 when we were playing this game. Yeah, I know. I'm an old dude. We played a lot of this. Boxing was the game. It's Friday night. We're in Jimmy Herron's basement. We got Tom Papcom there. We got Darby Swoboda there. We got Rick Yazinchek there. And we'd be drinking some beer. Who knows, maybe partaking of some funny little spices and herbs that we enjoyed back in the 80s and 70s. And we would take turns. We'd be like, okay, Jimmy and Dave go first. And I'd win. And then it'd be Tom Papcom next. Or me and Tom would go first. I'd beat him, then Jimmy and me. Jimmy might beat me. Jimmy and me were like the best. We were good at it. The one thing about boxing is if you just get the right cadence and you got your opponent in the right position, there's nothing you can do about it. It's like just combination and they're dead. And we played a lot of this game at parties, probably boxing and Dragster. Dragster was great because you could get it done in like 30 seconds. So if we had a party of 100 people, which you might be thinking, this guy never had a party of 100 people. Well, you don't know me, right? My house was the party house from 24/7. My mom worked, she was never home, and I watched my little brother, and boy, did we have parties. I mean, it was crazy. But again, this would be one of those things that we would do. We would play this. We would get people. We broke so many joysticks on this game. This game was so hard on joysticks, but we loved it. And if you notice, there seems to be a lot of Activision games in my list here. And Activision it blew our world. When they started coming out with some of these games, compared to what we had been playing, like Combat, and Air Sea Battle. Those were the games we played until you started seeing the space. But most of my buddies didn't like Space Invaders. I don't know why. I was a nut. But boxing, my dad was a boxer, and my buddy Jimmy was into boxing, and I was into boxing. And sometimes we would just get gloves on a Friday night, and we would box. But I'd say quite a few times we'd pop this card in, and we would just have a great, great Friday evening. This is one of those games that originally, I believe, I took it back, and then for whatever reason, I probably played it at another person's house. I decided the game wasn't that lame because you're just shifting gears. And back in those days, like I said, games were so expensive and you worked so hard if you got it. If it didn't give you that instant replayability, I would just take it back to Toys R Us, or I think it was actually Children's Palace back then, and I would take the game back and I'd get a new one. A lot of times that's what I do. I'd buy a game on Friday, and then I'd take it back on Sunday and get another game. And then that would be the game I'd probably keep. And if I didn't like that game, then I'd return it and I'd go get the previous game. And now we know why Atari probably failed at some point. Yeah, I know. It's my fault. But Dragster, even though it was so simple, we could have 100 people at a party and we could play this game. And we'd be yelling and screaming, and people might be taking bets off to the side, but we'd be cheering on. There'd be Darby going against Tom, and we're like cheering on Darby. We're like, dude, and bloom, he'd blow his engine. And that was because you had to ride this one. This was not a Zen game. This was a game you had to ride right on that knife edge. Right on that knife edge. So most people probably hated this game, but it made my list. Now we're going to talk about another great game, 1981 Activision classic, Freeway. My friends and I, again, this was one that we would play a lot. Maybe not huge amount of people at one time like we would Dragster, but we would get together, play it. This is what Frogger should have been. When you compare this to the Atari 2600 Frogger, this is what Frogger should have been. That's why this is a great game. This gives me a much closer to arcade experience of Frogger than the Atari 2600 did with the game Frogger. When David Crane invented Pitfall in 1982, when we saw that game, we didn't believe it. We thought we had a whole new system. I mean, yeah, they did great games like Freeway and stuff like that, but like I said, Pitfall, it just showed us a whole new way. It did things that was virtually impossible, that should never have been able to be done with an Atari 2600. And they figured out a way of doing it. That I will say this about Activision. Atari did everything they could to stop this company. But I believe that this company added 3 years to the Atari 2600's life. That this system right here, if we would have continued down that vein of games, if Atari would have been more careful about, who made games, what made games, and if they would have focused more, if different companies would have focused more on quality, we would have had another 3-4 years out of the Atari. We wouldn't have had the crash. But I think that crash would have happened 2 or 3 years earlier if it was not for Pitfall. I don't think we would have been playing this system in 1985 if it wasn't for Pitfall in 1982. Because it was like basically a middle finger to every Atari 2600 developer. It was like, do this. See if you can do that. And then you had all these other companies just starting to explode. Now, the problem was most of these companies were probably filled with schlub programmers like me, making maybe a serviceable game for 10 people, but, a piece of crap for a million people, like AT, So it's just got to make everybody's list. If you've got a top 10 Atari 2600 list and you don't have Pitfall on it, I'm sorry, but you don't know nothing about retro gaming. Yard's Revenge, beautiful game, fun game. Uh, Difficult. I found it to be a difficult game. It was not like easy. I You didn't have a lot of room to move your Yar around. Your Yar was your like insect spaceship that you're eating this barrier, and the barrier's moving, and there's this like entity that when you get the barrier and you're eating the barrier, it then shoots cannons at you. And I owned an actual Space Invaders upright machine. The machine I would have loved to have owned would have been a Star Castle. And this game was originally going to be a port of Star Castle. And I played, you didn't see a lot of Star Castle. If you went to the arcade, there might be one. In my neighborhood, there was like a pizza parlor that we never ate pizza at, and they had a Star Castle machine. So I would go there just to play Star Castles. I would go to Space Invaders, but when they had Star Castle, it didn't last long. And in Star Castles, it was more, it was 360, so you had a bunch of barriers that were going around the center, and you were more like asteroids, where you're shooting around like asteroids. But it was a tough game. I enjoyed playing it, but I could never get anywhere near what I got like on Space Invaders. It was a difficult game, but I really enjoyed Yard's Revenge. I played, and I played that game. I enjoyed it. But most of my friends didn't as much as I did. And that's one of the reasons it might not be a little higher on the list. Adventure. That's another beautiful game. I don't know what it is about that game, but when I look at the screen, and it's so simple, most of the different screens within the game, it's only 2 or 3 colors, but it's got this perfect gray, it's got perfect yellows, perfect blues. I've always been a big Dungeons and Dragons fan, and when this game came out, and I mean back in the 80s and early 90s, we were primarily mid 80s to maybe 90, 91 before, we quit playing the Atari 2600 on the actual hardware device. Even though over the years I've had many. At one time I had almost, 100 different Atari 2600 games. And now I'm just starting to recollect the ones I loved. But Adventure, I just love the look of it. And one of my dreams is to actually make a new version of Adventure with my hat off to it. Warren Robinette, I don't know how you pronounce his name, but that guy became like a god. Again, it was like probably Atari Age or some silly magazine that I saw that, if I find this dot and I do this and I do that, I can find a secret room that Atari didn't want me to know about that would tell me the name of the guy who created this thing. And boy, it took me forever, but I finally found it, I got it, and I played this game so much, I could complete it in like 2 minutes and 15 seconds. And I don't know why, I loved playing it. Is it a hard game? No. Is it a deep, complex game? No. But when this came out, this was it. I was like, I'm playing Dungeons and Dragons. I got dragons chasing me. I got bats stealing stuff from me. I got bridges and secret dots and swords and chalices. Should they have made it more rooms? Yeah, they should have. But they didn't know a lot of the stuff that say Activision. This was at the beginning of the Atari 2600. Activision really showed us what could be done. But before then, we had games like Adventure. And I'm telling you, if I see just like the starting room, I love the look of it. I just love the look of it. Well, Space Invaders is one of my all-time favorite games. I've probably played this game more than any other game on the Atari 2600. I'm not as good as it now as I used to be because my hands don't work that good anymore. But that's the only joystick I can work is the Atari 20. I mean, I have to have a joystick. I can't use a gamepad controller. But I tell you, I remember reading in, I think it was Atari Age, they had said that 250,000 points at the time, this was in the 80s, was the high score for Space Invaders. And boy, did I want to break that record. So I'd say I played at least 3,000 hours of Space Invaders. And one day I was sitting there, had started playing it. I'm about 16. And my buddy Jimmy Herron, maybe I was 17. My buddy Jimmy Herron comes over, and I had started playing it, and I was on my first guy. And in Space Invaders, it only goes to 10,000 points. And when it gets to 10,000 points, it turns over. So I was counting every time, and I had turned it over 15 times on my first guy, and I died. And it was like you shot my dog. I could not play. I just put the joystick down, and to me, if I would have just played 2 and 3, but I was in the zone. That's the thing about Space Invaders. Out of every other game, except for maybe 1 or 2, I get in the zone. And it's once you get past the screen, it's the second screen past where there's no houses on the default game. To me, that's the perfect game in this collection of 112 games I think you get with Space Invaders, right? It's just gorgeous. I mean, this game was perfect for the Atari 2600. Was it like the arcade? No, but boy, was it a good rendition of it for us to play at home back in the day. Okay, now what we're going to do is I'm going to share one game in honorable mention. Jimmy and I waited so much for this game, Pac-Man. When we heard it was coming, we saw the commercials. We were so looking forward to it. And I don't remember exactly, but games were like $39 or $59 back then. That wasn't cheap for us. Minimum wage was $3.50 an hour, I think. So you figure 20 hours of work to buy a game. Now, if the game really sucked, we took it back. I would always buy games only at places that would take it back. But we looked so forward to this game. And when it came out, we went to the Westgate Mall. They were having a huge event. There was at least 100 people, maybe 200 at this event. and they were giving out like stickers and different advertising things, all promoting this game, Pac-Man. And it was just great. We took it home, and the game was mediocre at best. But hey, it turned over at 100,000, if I remember. Most games up to that point would only had to turn over based on limitations at 10,000 points. And so Jimmy and I, we decided, and we played that game every day for 2 or 3 weeks. We would take turns. And I have somewhere on an old beta tape, Jimmy and I think it was 1,000,000 points. I forget how many points it went to. Somebody correct me in the comments how many points it went to. But we actually recorded on an old Betamax us turning it over. We had to record it over one of my mom's videos. We were like, go grab a VHS. We're going to turn this over. We got to record it. And it took us hours. Basically, Jimmy and I took turns. So I would play and play and play until I couldn't play anymore. Then I handed the controller to him. And together we had a great time. But I'll say, out of all the ones on my list, this is probably one of the ones I enjoy the least playing today. But based on the experiences of this game and how much my buddy and I enjoyed playing it, that's why it made my list.